Okay, so thank you for joining our study group. I think this is like maybe the fourth session we've had, maybe fifth session. I'm not sure exactly, but I put a placeholder. So if you're joining for the first time, um, what I'm talking about is based off of this lab guide that I've created, and this is the actual link of the lab guide. So let me actually give you this in case you don't have it. So if I go into the chat, I'm going to paste it in there. So this is what I'm referring to. And this is recorded, so those that have to drop off, you can join. You'll be able to catch up where we are at any time. But thanks for attending. Um, so, so that's the study guide. So I'm going to bring up the study guide on my screen, and we've went through some sections, but today I'm starting from here. So I'm just starting kind of like where I am. And then in the recordings, you can go back and there's explanations on how to set up your DevNet environments. We use DevNet as a way to spin up virtual routers, and it's free. So using that environment with CML, you can use a custom topology that we have, bring that up, and then we have a jump box that's called the dev box. So that's where we're running Ansible. And what I do now is I go ahead and run this script that I created that we refer to here ahead of time, so you don't have to wait for me. But you'll notice it takes like 5 or 10 minutes to go through and reinstall Python and Ansible and modify a bunch of files because their jump box is old, and it even has like the old Python 2.7 in there. So we have to kind of convert it over to something that we can use. So that's sort of the first step. And in those first steps, it's defined like explained earlier up, as you scroll up in the lab guide. But one thing that I want to call out to make sure everyone remembers is it tells you to pull down a repository, and you'll clone down this repository. It has all the steps, and there's a make file inside the repository. But before you run that, you want to change this GitLab user to your username, which also bodes to the instructions to create an account. So you'll create an account, and then you'll be able to have your own repository. And the reason why you have your own repository, and we call it My Project, is so that you can save your work as you're going through these labs. And then you can always, have your own progress. You can go quicker than what we're going, or if you're starting later, it doesn't matter. But you'll be able to save your files because that sandbox goes away. And you want to get your files off of there, and the repository is like the easiest way to be able to do that each time. So we're here, a continuation. So I have my project that I already pulled down. So that's over here. I might have to log. Am I still logged in? Oh, I actually lost my. No, my tunnel's still up. All right, so I need to bring up another prompt here. So the jump box is always the same IP for everybody. It's developer is the username, and the DevNet, Cisco DevNet provides the credentials for you. One for the VPN, like you have to have your VPN running to connect to it. And then they'll provide you with all the usernames and IPs of the devices, which are the same for everybody, once you connect the VPN. So 10.10.20.50 is the IP address. And capital C1SCO12345 is the password. And what I'm talking about is this My Project. So I've already ran my script to pull mine down. And this is the repo that you'll pull down first. So you clone this down. The directions tell you how to do it. There's a make file inside of here. You run that with that environment variable that has your username so that it gets your My Project. You pull that down, and then once you have My Project, always make sure that you change directories into it so everything that you're doing is in your folder. And then at the end of this, we commit those changes into the repo and push it into our own personal GitLab account. And then that's how you have your progress each time. So I have these files. I have an inventory that was created before that I'll need to use that has these entries in it. If you haven't gotten to this point yet, you'll go through those steps and create your own inventory. So in terms of like what we're doing here is we're actually looking at some ad hoc commands, which a lot of folks use those for quick troubleshooting and to determine the state of things. But if you're not familiar with that, In the lab guide, there's links. So we don't have time to go into, all the reference material. But if you're, interested, then follow these links, and it'll give you the documentation that explain a lot of these different modules that we're using, and some other call outs too. Like you'll see a warning message because of the Python being 3.6, but don't just ignore that. That's just a warning, and there's nothing I can do about that because I couldn't. There's not a repo in the CentOS version 7 for me to update it any further than that. So you just have to deal with that. So we're here in our My project. I'm going to run this particular ad hoc command, and I'll explain what it is. Make this a little bit bigger. And we'll go through the contents of this command. Make this bigger now. All right, so when you run an ad hoc command, it's just Ansible. It's not Ansible-playbook. The -m is for module, and this is the module that you're using. So that setup script in the make file that I mentioned actually installs a couple of collections. So one of them is Nexus, and one of them is the iOS XE. So that's what we're using here for iOS command. And then these are arguments, -a. So we have to quote the argument, and we're using the parameter of commands. And the actual command that we want to send, we'll use single quotes because we're already using the double quotes, right? So that works within inside of them. So inside the quotes, we have the show IP interface brief, and you can use abbreviations. Just any syntax that the router understands will work fine with the commands module. And then this is the group, A4N-net. So in my inventory, you can see that A4N-net, what it's doing is, and I guess it didn't show like the whole thing, but underneath here should have the children of the router and the switch group. So you see how this is going. It's groups, and then there's parent groups with children groups. So A4N network includes like all the network groups, which is routers and switches. So those devices would be a part of that. And from that, we can point specific commands to host or all the host or whatever groups that we want. So this should work because I brought up my topology, so I should be able to connect. All right, so it's just doing a show IP interface brief to the routers that are in the DevNet. Now, some of these other warnings and such are because this is an older version that we started with, and I updated. In the newer one, it really wants to use pylib SSH is the default, but that's not installed, right? Because it wouldn't work with that old Python. So because of the dependency stuff using this old jump box, and the reason why am I using the jump box? Because we have a VPN. I can actually communicate directly to these devices, but everybody would have to have everything ready on their laptop for that to work. So I thought it would be a little bit easier to use the jump box. Now I'm kind of rethinking it because we have to kind of tweak that. But then on the other hand, if you take the test today, it has all these old versions in it, and they're in the process of updating it. So until they update it, when they update it, it's going to look more like a normal environment or a current environment that I use, like a VS Code and all that good stuff and Ansible Navigator. In the older state of it, if you take it right now, you'll be dealing with a jump box and all that anyway. So it's kind of like once they get rid of that, I'll probably can this jump box and then just have everyone like help them build their environment to run directly from their laptop. So for now, we just kind of live in both worlds, the new and the old. So here's just an ad hoc command for show IP interface brief. Here's the output. Should look similar to what we saw there. Now, let's see, what's the next command that we want to do here? So let me make this larger so you can see. So the next one that I have in there is to ping this IP address from the management VRF of the devices that are in the router group. So this is a good test to make sure that all the routers in my Cisco lab can connect to that jump box, just like we did. I can just do this. No, this makes it bigger. Right, so each one of the routers was able to ping 20.50 is the same box that we're SSH into, and everything's fine there. So we have good connectivity from the routers, which we did anyway because we were able to run that command earlier. But this is just a good check if you want to do a connectivity using the iOS ping. So go back to Hue over here. What else do we have? So this is the same thing, but from Nexus. So this is a good example. Like, it's pretty consistent how you use this across different devices. It's just the name of the module is different. So both my Nexus, there's two Nexus switches in that topology, which if you haven't seen the topology, the one that I'm talking about, this is the default topology right here. This is what we change it to. So I've got two Nexus switches, and then I have the two Cisco routers here as a distribution. They're CSR 1000Vs, and then I have one core router that is a CSR 1000V. And the reason why it's kind of a smaller topology is because of the amount of RAM and everything. So it runs better if I keep it kind of limited. But this is the good enough topology to represent all the scenarios from like the certification part of it. So it should work fine for that in particular. So back to the lab guide. All right, so here it's talking about Ansible doc. So this is like the documentation I showed you earlier that we went to from those links, and it was the website for the documentation. That same documentation is in YAML format, installed locally where you install these collections and these modules. So from your installed Ansible, you can see both the Nexus and the iOS since we installed both of those. And we can look at a specific module to see the same information. In particular, the examples, as I mentioned, it's very useful to see like a working example. So we can just use this command. It's pretty straightforward. If you're offline or whatever, then this still gives you a way of getting to the documentation. Right, so you just scroll down until you get to the examples right here. Now, a basic playbook. So in terms of a playbook, we do have some requirements. So for this one, we'll just piece this together real quick. And I think, yeah, I think I didn't provide you one already in there. Let's see, what do we have? Yeah, so we have to make this file. So since we're working from this jump box, I usually just use Vim to create files and to edit them, but you could use Nano, would work too. And what did I call it? Just basic. All right, so to edit from Vim, it's an I to insert. So if you don't feel like typing everything, you can just copy it out of the lab guide to save time. And it should keep its syntax. So with this one, you have to name your playbook. That is a requirement, so that you know what it is. It's you know, at the top level of a playbook, you could have multiple plays. So that's what this is. So it starts with these three ticks indicate the beginning of the playbook, and then you would name the first play, and a play has to have hosts. So hosts point to your inventory. So in this case, we're pointing to a group, but we could point to just a specific host or a list of hosts or a list of groups, or all would implicitly bring every group in as a target. So we're just going to point this to the switches, and we're going to configure some VLANs. And we have to have at least one task in our play. or in our playbook. Now, a playbook can have multiple plays, so you could have like another line of name, host, and task further down. But normally, I don't like doing that. I don't like combining too much into a playbook, like multiple plays. I like to keep playbooks to a play and the play very limited. Normally, I'm using roles, and we'll talk more about roles later, but they're more purpose built and packaged so that they're reusable. So we don't have to do a lot of coding on the front end on our playbooks, just the things that are very specific, to what we're running in that particular automation. And the roles would account for all of the things that it's doing, but it's more for the use case, and we're just changing variables and iterating through those. So we have our task that we want to run in this one. So this is using the Nexus OS VLAN resource module. So we want to add these two VLANs. The default is merge. Remember merge from the States? So now that I'm in the Vim, I'll just have to make sure that I get everything aligned properly. So I think I need to move this one up. Vim's not the best to work with, but it's doable. Get that one over, you over. Right, so that should be okay like that. And then escape, :WQ bang, that saves that file. Now to run a playbook the way that we're doing it, we're not using the Ansible Navigator here. We are using Ansible Playbook. In the current environment, in the cert uses Ansible Playbook. The newer one will use the Ansible Navigator. So we'll start to look at that. So in here, we have our playbook saved. So I should be able to run Ansible Playbook, basic. It only does standard output, right? So I could turn on verbosity if you want to see more, but for this one, I think we're fine just like this. The inventory. So we configured the inventory prior, and there was an Ansible config file that tells our Ansible playbook or Ansible application where the inventory is. So that's why I don't have to add it here. It should just work. But I didn't spill out playbook. Right, so it changed two of them, but I didn't turn on verbosity, so we just see, the summary of what happened for that task. So we have, two that were ran because we have the two switches, switch 1 and switch 2. They were both okay, and we made changes. If I run it again, we won't have changes. We'll just have okays. Just to show you the idempotency. But I'm going to run this one with verbosity so you'll see a little bit more. All right, so here's like the config. And because it's a resource module, it will show us a before and an after, and then like the command lines that it sends when it makes a change. But this time it did make a change, so we only have the before. That's why the before is here. So that's what it kind of looks like in JSON. So we don't want to see it in JSON. So what we have here is we're just going to use an Adhoc command such that we can see our VLANs in a more human readable format. Right, so it's a Nexus OS underscore command module, and the command is show VLAN, and we're applying it only to the A4N switch group. Right, so we can see here the two VLANs that we did were 5 and 10, and that has our naming on it. And it was a merge, right? Because the default is merge, which is the safest way to run VLAN commands, by the way, because we didn't want to delete these existing VLANs because those may be needed, especially like this one that's named prod is probably something we shouldn't just blow away. But I don't know. I like writing resumes every once in a while, but I think that's the one to, to worry about. So there we can see what we built. Now, this is the last part of this section, and I kind of went over on the other one. So what I could do here is just to make sure that everyone's on the same page for saving your work. So don't just end your labs, right? So for this particular one, I made some changes and created that playbook and everything, and that's all good, but it'll go away. So what do I have to do to save? I need to run some of these commands here, which are for Git. So don't forget your Git commands. So the first thing is, here's the files that I have right now. What I want to do is I'm just going to go ahead and add all of them, even though we didn't change them. But instead of me listing, or explicitly typing each one that we did change, I'm just going to go ahead and make this staging is what we call it, bringing it into Git across all the files that are in that folder. The second thing I want to do is say that, okay, I have those in there, so I can do a Git status, and it shows what's happened so far. Out of that, adding all of them in, it's telling me that, hey, you have this new file here, right? The other ones, nothing changed, but this is the new file, so I can kind of see like what it's going to send. So if I'm cool with that, I can say git commit -m, and then this is a message for me, so I know in my repository what I'm looking at. So I'm going to do initial, and you could put anything in here. If you're doing something very specific, then you may want to say like change the whatever it was. So for now, I'm just putting initial, just so there's no real reason to change this one for me. But you can put whatever you want in there. It's just arbitrary. It's just for you. So I put that in there. Now it's there. It's committed, but I haven't pushed it out of my local repository. It's just sitting in. I mean, yeah, it's in my local repository committed, but I haven't pushed it to my remote repository. So my remote repository, this is the one that I provide for you with like new files that you pull down in the beginning, and this is where that make file was. But the one that I'm talking about, and if I search for my project, it has an underscore. Yeah, this is me, and then you're going to want to have one, under your own user account. These are all my files right here, but I do not have the basic.yaml yet, but I have all the other files. So for me to have them, it's git push. And what it's going to do is it's going to ask me for my username and password. But one of the things I didn't do is I did in my script, I tell it what my username is. So that's already been done. But if you do this manually, one of the first steps is you have to tell Git what your username is. But if you run that make script, and if you do that environment variable before you run it, like it tells you in the guide, it'll make the Git aware of what your username is. So that's a part of it as well. So if I hit git push, it's going to ask me to log in with my username and my password, and this will be whatever password you create. And don't fat finger it. Then I go over here. Sometimes you got to refresh, right? And there's the basic.yaml is now in my repo, and we just added it. Everything else was from a while ago. Here's one from 1 week ago. So that's how you save your work. If you forget to do that, then you're just going to have to go back, because a lot of these steps are they build on each other in these labs, or at least in the beginning, because I'm showing you like some of the foundational things. So you're not going to want to keep building your inventory, every time that you go into the lab guide. So you're definitely going to want to save those. If you don't want to save them this way, then you can you have the VPN connection, so you could do like SCP or SFTP or something like that to pull them down. But this way, it's like we're all doing the same thing, and I think that that'll be more valuable. So the next section, and this is a good stopping point, because we're doing something different next time. So in the next one, we're going to use a different lab environment. So in section 3, we're going to use a lab environment from Red Hat. And it'll give us the ability to use the Ansible Navigator. So instead of using the VPN in the CML like we did today, and for like all the other labs that were needing a topology. For this one, we can just use a router and a switch that are not connected together. It doesn't matter. It's not like really doing any networking stuff. So we're going to use the always on router and switch in Cisco DevNet. And that one is not dedicated to you, so you'll see other people in it potentially, right, making changes, but you should be able to make the changes that you need and see it actually work. So we're going to use that one. And then in the Cisco uh, routers, since they're on the internet, we can use the Ansible navigator that's running in this Red Hat lab. So in that one, there's some, initial documents that you should look at to tell you like, hey, what is the Ansible navigator? So I would encourage you to look at this. I also mentioned like those environments, those execution environments that have that are containerized. So to become familiar with that, in this lab, you're going to interact with it. So you'll reserve an environment. You don't have to like log in or anything. It's just it'll create like a session from the link that I provide you. So like from the lab guide, you'll click on this, and actually I don't want to do it like that. I want to run it in a different tab. So open link in a new tab. So you'll notice that when you bring that link up, it's sitting like this. It won't do anything until you click launch. So you can actually get this if you want to play around with it ahead of time too. And then you just hit start, but you'll notice there's like a progress thing. So that progress, it takes like a few minutes for some of this stuff to come up completely. But once it's there, you can start the lab. Like this one, I'm clicking on it, and it's not really doing anything yet. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, so it just takes a couple of minutes. That was actually a lot faster. So once you have this environment, it has some instructions for you, like how you can manipulate it and use it a little bit differently. So like here is the they call it the VS Code editor, and you can go in, and you don't have to use this one that's embedded for their specific lab. And feel free to do their lab if you like. But for our lab, we're actually going to bring up a new interface. So it's going to be a new window. It just takes a second to bring up another tab. And then now we can copy and paste and do everything just like we have like a local VS Code, but we're running in their environment. And the way that you can interact with it is you can bring up a new terminal, and you actually have a terminal here. So some of the steps are going to be to clone down your My Project. And then we're going to work with those routers from here, but we're going to use the Ansible navigator is already installed on this one. Pulls down a container just like it did on my environment. The first time does take a little bit longer for it to pull down the images, but once it's there, it's quicker the next subsequent run of that. So hey, it's there. But once it finishes, you're able to interact with it. So that one actually didn't like their own config for some reason, but we'll have our own Ansible navigator config file, and it'll have steps that'll show us how to do that. So the next time, that's what we're going to do is we're going to spend time on the navigator, and we're going to interact with those routers, and then we'll come back to our lab environment after that, where we actually will need a topology. But to do things like learn the navigator and the Ansible automation platform, we can use this lab environment because those components are already installed. And we'll have like a simple network that we have to deal with because we can only get to what we can get to directly over the internet. But we'll do that for the purposes of just learning the Ansible side of it. And then for like to learn the network automation pieces that are more complicated, like OSPF and BGP, where we need to connect things together, then that's when we'll have to lean towards the Cisco DevNet sandboxes. So in the lab guide, it'll be very clear of like where we're working and what to use. And the My Project will be the files that you're always going to save yours. And the Ansible4Networking repo is where I'm going to give you like templates and files and scripts and things to use on your end. So that's what I had today. I appreciate those who were able to stay on. Does anybody have any questions, study group related, before we shut this recording off?
I have one quick question, Tony. I think
Sure.
when you change the output from JSON format to the router's CLI, like so output, what did you do? Sorry, I missed that part actually. I think the previous lab, the NXOS output was different. I think from JSON to
Oh, yeah, because what I did was it was just standard output because I just ran like a normal show command.
yeah. So what was the command option you have to pass? Just standard out or
Yeah, so for that one, it depends. Some of them are a little bit different. Sometimes it's line. Sometimes it's just standard underscore out, and then sometimes it's underscore lines.
okay,
It
got
just
it.
depends on which one it is. So let me see what we did with Nexus. Yeah, so that was the documentation part, the playbook. So this we just did show. Well, this one we didn't have to do anything because it was just the ad hoc command. It's only in standard output format.
Oh,
But
okay.
if you run it in a playbook,
Then
you
you
can
have to
show
do
it in this format as well. It
okay.
doesn't have to be JSON.
Got
So
it.
you'll have either standard out or standard out lines.
Okay.
Sometimes either one's available, but the lines looks a little bit like more like how it would look normally from just like the command output of the router. So we'll go through those as we do different playbooks and stuff too. We'll use the debug module
Okay.
with the standard output.
All right. Thank you. And how often the resource modules the vendors make available, like anything new
Yeah,
feature add?
yeah. So to know what they're up to, um, that's a good question. So they start with Galaxy, and then they go through the certification process for, like I mentioned, I think earlier in the
Yeah.
first part of the session, we have the certified ones. So if you go to Galaxy, you can see what they're working on because they'll start there. So like if we go into like Cisco iOS, right, and then click in here, so they'll have a repo. So if we have any problems, this is where you go to like to install it, because you can copy this command, and this is the command that you would manually, if you manually, install it in your environment. When you're creating containers, it's a little bit different, but it's still using the same collection. So that's the code. But if you want to see the actual code and like what they're doing with it, here you can see that they released this 9 days ago.
Okay.
Was 4.4.1. But if there's like certain, like that's just like the collection update itself. But if you want to get into the nitty gritty of what's going on with like things that might not be working and that type of stuff, you can go into the GitHub, and then in the GitHub you can go like into issues, and here's where you can say, hey, something's not working, or somebody else is already working on something that was a problem, and that's where you can track this, and you can see like they'll give like an ETA of how long it should take them and that kind of stuff. And it also shows like contributors too. So sometimes you can ping them in GitHub and they'll answer questions depending on if someone's available or whatever. But that's how you would work from like the community side of this. On the certified side, it's a little bit different because you can open up an actual ticket, because it's like a normal Red Hat ticket for that piece.
Okay. Yeah.
But you should see like a lot of activity even on the modules that have been around a while, because they're constantly fixing things, or if they add a new release feature and something doesn't work, then this is where you can go to kind of see if it's there. And if it's not there, then you can go ahead and log an issue yourself.
Okay.
And normally what they'll say is run the playbook in Verbosity and things you saw.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Cool. Does anyone else have anything? Is there anyone that's like done all the labs so far? Is anyone like just starting from today?
I will
Okay.
start soon. I will go back to some of the recordings. I have kind of watched few of them while doing other things, so I will kind of go back and start from the beginning and start doing it.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of like some, like a trail of crumbs from the other
Yeah.
sessions. And then we have the Discord too. I just wanted to remind people that um, that link is on the meetup site.
Yeah.
To it. And then you can ask questions there too. We should notice if one of them pops up there. So as people are catching up, or if you want to get ahead, I'm going to start adding, like, I was kind of busy the last couple of weeks, but I have like some more labs that I want to get, like sections that are in, ahead of where we're at. So I'll start putting some of that stuff out too. So if anyone wants to move ahead, feel free and just let us know if you run into issues and stuff, and we'll fix them up in the lab guide.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, I hope everyone has a great weekend, and I'll go ahead and shut this one off.
Okay, thank you. You too. Bye.
Okay, take care. See you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See ya. Bye.
See ya.